podcast and blog post that I thought was really insightful and spot on about some of the common mistakes that family offices make. Would you mind sharing some of the top ones that you've seen?
Yeah, sure. As you mentioned, it was an episode of the podcast that was actually requested. Sometimes I get requests from people around sort of if you could cover sort of the things that we should, potentially look out for, and the title was it's a bit listicle, it's a bit clickbaity, but the whole idea there's 10, and I'm sure there'll be another 10 that come up at some point, right? But it was sort of the 10, mistakes that I see single family offices make and how to avoid them or how to fix them, right? So ideally, like I said, it's educational, so we're trying to circumvent a lot of these. I would say that of the 10, the top 5 tend to be focused around, well, the number one being, and you know this just as well as I do, that family offices have a propensity to use workarounds outside of instead of improvement. Like that tends to be like a challenging piece, which is to say we'll patch this up, we'll kick the can down the road a little bit, and we'll work around it. And that's not good for the family. Certainly not good for the people that work in the family, because it's like, well, I know that there's a potentially better way of doing this, but we continue to patch over it. And I think that's, like I said, the podcast was either to avoid it or to fix it. And I think that's one of the best ones to be able to avoid, because once you get that challenge, once you see that something's not working properly, I think looking for solution rather than, and you had Ray, Delizio on previously, and it was, he hates the words, good is the enemy of great.
Yeah.
Or great is the enemy of good, sorry. And, he doesn't like that term, but it's because you do see so many workarounds in this space, so many people kicking that down the road. The other one is price over value. People really, for this podcast, I think it's incredibly important because it is around technology, and people look at headline figures or they get a bit of sticker shock and sort of go, well, that seems like a really expensive version of, but we can use Excel or we can use, a really inexpensive version of it, and no one's going to question it. But the actual value of something is very hard for a lot of family offices to make that determination. So a lot of the work that I do is around sort of making sure that we do that value prop or that cost versus value add. And particularly on the infrastructure piece, I think it's an incredibly important one. So I'll just go through 2 more. So the other one that always comes up is keeping things in their heads. And I'm sure you've seen this, I'm sure everyone listening to this has seen the same thing, which is we understand how we're doing things. It's like, okay, well, how does the decision made? How the process made? What's the decision tree look like? What's the process and things like that? I know it's all up here. No, we got it. Don't worry. We've been doing this for a long time. This is how we make decisions. And that often works really well with operating businesses, especially sort of, operating businesses that are run off the back of an individual and make their good decision process. But just being able to articulate it and write it down so that next generation can look at it, so executives can see it. So our understanding, and really that's the first time a lot of the time that people have articulated or written down things like purpose, things like investment policy, things like risk expectation, all these sorts of things. So my idea a lot of the time is to try and get people to say, if someone came into this office that had no idea around what was going on, what would they see? And sometimes it's just a whiteboard in the corner. And I don't think that's enough a lot of the time. So I think that's one of the other big ones. And I think the last one I'll cover, and, if everyone's interested, there's 10 of them, right? So
I go put a link in the podcast because I thought they were all great and spot on.
Yeah. So the last one, which comes up a lot, and this is that they think that they're the only ones that have gone through these challenges before. As much as everyone thinks they're a unique snowflake, and individually they are, and there's idiosyncratic and things about family offices that are unique, but very rarely in the work that I do family offices going through something that someone hasn't gone through before. And this could be about the investment policy. It could be about engaging the next generation. It could be about the investments that they're doing, or the challenges they're having with distribution policy. All these sorts of things. Everyone has had a version of that. And one of the things I love doing more than anything is introducing families to other families that I recognize as going, you know what? The challenge that you're talking about here is not necessarily something that you need my help with. It's worth having the conversation with a family that's gone through exactly the same thing. And you can have a really meaningful, important, and valuable conversation with them, which can reduce the stress, reduce the risk, all these sorts of things. You just have to ask the question. So maybe they're my top, what was it, 4 or 5.
Yeah, I think those are great. I do, there is that saying, like, you've seen one family office, but to your point, then they're not all unique snowflakes. There are certain commonalities that families all.
Structurally, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Which is where I work, right? So I work in structure. And in structure, I've seen what good looks like, right? And I think that's what I'm trying to do when I talk to clients, which is we can move towards what good looks like rather than trying to, move around in the dark.
Yeah, there are best practices, right? And there's only so many ways
Absolutely.
you can do a capital call, right? So
Yeah. And
leverage
the
some of that.
technology in particular. Yeah. I mean, technology is a great example because, we live in Australia, right? So there's some platforms that people think will work. And I go, well, it's potentially not going to because of this and this. And the only reason I know that is because I've helped install it or I've talked to a client that has that exact challenge. So these sort of things can really help for sure.
I do see that with the workarounds in particular, the technical debt, I think they kind of put off and accumulated. A lot of it's because they are cost center. So it is a little bit, maybe more of a difficult conversation to have when you talk about some
Yeah.
of these capital upgrades to modernize. To Ray's point, I love his quote there is Rayism. You can't out software bad process, right? So I think that's some of it. Even when they spend the money, they don't get the results
For
that
sure.
they want, and you see it because they're not following these best practices necessarily. So I think those are great. Thanks for sharing those, Shaun.